Our assignments today is fundamentally to take a very careful look at the last part of Canto 2, and in doing so, discuss in details the role of the Sylphs, the sources of Pope's materials for inducting the Sylphs into the poem, and of course also to take a look at how the Sylphs aid the mock heroic framework of the poem. Now, in our last lecture, we had talked about the Baron, offering his prayers, and we had seen how the Sylphs are the souls of the coquettish women who have, after their deaths, repaired into the ether to guard over the honor and aid the flirtatious advances of the young girls. So, in a certain sense, the Sylphs are already proud women who have flirted and who have received attention and who want to guard and continue this tradition with the younger women at present. So they are spirits, yet they still retain their female vanity and their pride in their beauty and resist the marriages from or the proposals of marriage from men. Therefore, the chief among them, of course, is Ariel, and Ariel gives a speech, and that is what we'll look at in greater detail, which imitates the speech of the great Achilles calling for arms, and it therefore uses a significant amount of metaphors from the military sphere. At the same time, as I pointed out, the Sylphs are objects of great imagination, and for Pope, they are passages, or they are moments when he can bring in the sublime, the beautiful within the poem to create moments of tiny, miniaturish, yet incredibly beautiful objects. Also remember that Pope is bringing in the Newtonian theory of optics, which was published in 1704, and there was a considerable interest in rainbows, in the theory of refraction of light into its various prismatic colors, not only in Pope, but also in the other poets as well. And therefore, there is a transference of a scientific discovery into the poetic imagination, as it were. You will remember that Pope was a friend of Newton and presided over Newton's funeral. So it is with that background that we will take a very careful look at Ariel's speech. And Ariel delivers this speech to the Sylphs and Sylphids. To your chief give ear, fays, fairies, genii, elves and demons here. Now remember that this is once again imitation or a mock heroic rendering of the list of angels that we have in Paradise Lost, where we have thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers. Therefore, that is transferred into Sylphs, Sylphids, fays, fairies, genii, elves, and demons. Now, what is the source of the Sylphs? I had promised to discuss this in today's class. Now, Pope is using multiple sources here. The passage in the preface that he talks about refers to the Rosicrucian doctrine. Now, the Rosicrucian doctrine was a doctrine that was handed over from the ancient ages, which believed that there was a spiritual world beyond the human world to which humans after their deaths retired. Now, and they were transferred into or transformed into tiny spirits who moved around in the ether. Now, it was also suggested that the Rosicrucian spirits would not be visible to ordinary men and women. It was only if they denied themselves sexuality, that they were chaste, if they followed the codes of chastity, only then would they be able to visualize this world. Now, Pope, of course, along with his friend Warburton, was extremely skeptical of these ideas. And he made quite a parody of them in The Rape of the Lock. So, in a certain sense, when Pope dissolves this Rosicrucian doctrine, he uses the Rosicrucian doctrine, no doubt, in the Sylphs. But when he laughs at them about the tiny creatures and he jokes about them guarding Belinda's honor, he is actually extremely skeptical of such an idea. But the idea was taken by Pope. The source was a small novelette called the Canto de Gabalis, rather. It was a small novelette which was translated during the 18th century. It was written by de Villers, and it talked about this doctrine of the existence of spirits in the ether after death. Now, the translation of Ayers appeared recently, and Pope borrowed elements from the Canto de Gabalis, this entire treatise, and referred to this elsewhere as a very extravagant system, a very extravagant in the sense that it is an extremely absurd system. So Pope was referring to its absurdities in his other writings. He talked about it as a theological philosophy which mixed pagan Platonism, Christian Quietism, and the Jewish Kabbalah, a composition enough to fright reason from human commerce. So Pope was talking about this rather ridiculously as some form of mumbo jumbo, which ordinary people could not understand. But please remember something, that the Rosicrucian doctrine meant that, it was visible, these spirits were visible only to people who denied themselves sexuality and who remained chaste. Now, Pope, in the epistle dedicatory to Arabella Fermor, which we read, talked about the machinery to signify that part which the deities, angels, or demons are made to act in a poem. And he referred to the Rosicrucians and the Canto de Gabalis as one which the fair sex have read it for one by mistake. And he talks about the four elements that are inhabited by the spirits, the sylphs, gnomes, nymphs, and salamanders. So he's transferring the Canto de Gabalis into a poetic version, but he says that it is something which is unbelievable, and only the credulous women can believe in this world of spirits. He says, the sylphs whose habitation is in the air are the best conditioned creatures imaginable, and any mortal may enjoy the most intimate familiarities with these gentle spirits upon a condition very easy to all true adepts, and inviolate preservation of chastity. Now, it is interesting because the sylphs are the coquettes, are the transformed coquettes, who have flirted with men, but who have denied sexual copulation, as it were, who have denied sexuality to men, and therefore they have the right to be transformed into the sylphs. This is point number one. So the first source is the Rosicrucian doctrine, popularized through the translation of de Villers' Le Canto de Gabalis. Now, what are the other sources? Pope also has numerous other sources that he uses. The first source, and these are indigenous sources, because you see, Pope is referring to the sylphs and sylphids, which are taken from the Rosicrucians. But he's also referring to fays, fairies, genii, elves, and demons. Now, the Conte de Gavilis was a French text, but these fays, fairies, genii, all these refer to more indigenous English legends of fairies, of tiny creatures called elves, and of course, passions and demons. Now, the sources here, very obviously, are from Shakespeare, for example, A Midsummer Night's Dream, where you have the presence of the tiny fairies. You have also Romeo and Juliet, where there's the Queen Mab passage, where there's the reference to fairies inhabiting the ether. There's also reference to Shakespeare's Tempest, where you have the spirit called Ariel. Again, the name comes from there. And you also have in Milton, of course, the concept of airy substances. So quite a significant amount of indigenous legend of fays and fairies that Pope is combining with the idea of the French text, which contained the Rosicrucian doctrine. This is the source of the Sylphs. Now, we will read the passages of Ariel, the speech of Ariel, and try and find out what is the function of the Sylphs. Now that we know where Pope took them from, the next question, the next basic question is, why did he use them? And what is their function? So we have divided this class, as it were, into three questions: where, why, and what. Let us now look at Ariel's speech. You know the spheres and the various tasks assigned by laws eternal to the Ariel kind. Some in the fields of purest ether play. Purest ether is purest air, therefore they would exist in the stratosphere as it were. Now, therefore, the Sylphs do not descend down, they play. And this concept of playing, making merry, leisurely activity is associated with both the aristocracy and the Sylphs. And then, you see, Ariel says, some in the fields of purest ether play and bask and whiten in the blaze of the day. So the Sylphs are, as it were, basking, that they're enjoying the bright light of the sun. Once again, let me highlight how Pope is going to use light in a dazzling aesthetic manner in the Rape of the Lock. Now, Pope's world of Belinda is marked by not only great prosperity in objects, but a dazzling quality of opulence and light, of great beauty. Now, why? Persistently, Belinda, as you've seen, is compared to the sun, right? Oped those eyes that must eclipse the day. And again, you have Belinda smiled and the world was gay. Now, therefore, the dazzling quality of the sun is, as it were, transferred to the dazzling beauty of light and the dazzling beauty of Belinda, so that Pope can breathe into this poem. Despite these tiny creatures and despite the feminine world, a world of the sublime, of greatest imaginative beauty. So the treatment of light, taken from a contemporary scientific doctrine, adds a degree of sublime aestheticism to the poem. So some guide the course of wandering orbs on high. This is the heroic, as it were, that the tiny Sylphs are responsible for guiding the planets through their motions. So see, there's great laughter also. There's great comedy also. When you imagine these small, tiny Sylphs, they are guiding the planets within the spheres. Once again, a reference also to Milton. Now, Milton, of course, talks about Galileo and the telescope through which he can see the planets and the orbs moving in their spheres. Pope miniaturizes the world of Milton, and he talks about the sylphs rather than the angels guiding the orbs, thereby creating this disparity between the epic and the mock epic. Some guide the course of wandering orbs on high, or roll the planets through the boundless sky. Some less refined beneath the moon's pale light. So he's using various spheres. You will remember your geography lessons and your concept of the stratosphere, the mesosphere, the ionosphere, right? So the different levels of the atmosphere. So the lesser sylphs, less refined, beneath the moon's pale light. Now notice how the light has changed. From the dazzling daylight, you have now the pale moonlight. You have to understand the very sophisticated filigree art that Pope uses. Filigree is very fine work on ivory. Those of you who have been to see the tomb of Salim Chishti will remember the very intricate work of the Jafri, the very intricate work which is there in the tomb of Salim Chishti. So Pope is very intricately laying out a very beautiful world of great light, right? So some less refined beneath the moon's pale light. Pursue the stars that shoot athwart the night. So the shooting stars, as it were, are being chased by the sylphs. Or suck the mists in the grosser air below. So this is the earth and its atmosphere. Or suck or dip their pinions in the painted bow. The painted bow, dip their pinions, dip their wings. Pinions is wings. In the painted bow. The painted bow is the rainbow. Once again, remember that the rainbow was a subject of great interest, not only to Newton, but also the poets. You can see this carried over into romantic poetry as well. For example, Shelley will talk about the cloud and the rainbow. Keats will talk about my heart leaping up when I see a rainbow in the sky. So the rainbow was seen as the embodiment of optics, the vibgyor, as it were, in the atmosphere, and the bringing together or the coalescence of all colors, the object of sublime beauty. So, or brew fierce tempests on the wintry main, or over the glebe is globe, distill the kindly rain. So the sylphs, Ariel says, are responsible for all atmospheric phenomenon, for storms, rainbows, and the rain. Once again, the contrast between the epic scope of the atmospheric activity and the tiny, puny size of the sylph generates the laughter. Watch all their ways and all their actions guide. Others on earth over the human race preside. So gradually from the atmosphere, they're coming down to the human race. This is what Ariel's domain is. Watch all their ways and all their actions guide. Of these, chief, the care of nations own, and guard with arms divine the British throne. So once again, this is a passage. The chief of all these sylphs, they guard the British throne. You see how the aesthetic and the political have come together in one fine moment. When Pope is talking about the sylphs, he's talking about beauty, aesthetics, mock heroic laughter. But suddenly, you see the best sylphs are guarding the British throne, pointing out to the centrality of Britain in the global economic order. So Britain is the center of the world. You will remember that great song, Rule Britannia, Britannia rule the waves. Britons never shall be slaves. So once again, Britain at the center of the world, and the greatest Sylphs, or the most important Sylphs, guarding the British throne, reminding you of how the beauty and the political, the aesthetic and the political are intertwined in the text. Our humbler province, as Ariel says, is to tend the fair, is to look after the fair, not a less pleasing, though less glorious care, to save the powder from too rude a gale, so that the powder is not disturbed, the facial powder or the powder on the hair is not disturbed by too much of a wind, nor let the imprisoned essences exhale. So, so that the perfumes that have been poured on the body are not, filtered away into the air. To draw fresh colors from the vernal flowers, to steal from rainbows ere they drop in shower. So to create the blush, the colors on the lady's cheek from the flowers and the rainbows. Now look at that beauty of that line. Draw fresh colors from the vernal flowers, to steal from rainbows ere they drop in showers. And you see how beautifully Pope is manipulating the liquid consonants, the L sound, to steal from rainbows ere they drop in showers, to draw fresh colors from the vernal flowers. See how liquid the consonants are and how beautifully they create this element of flowing colors on the lady's cheek. A brighter wash to curl their waving hairs, assist their blushes, inspire their airs. So the makeup, as it were, comes from the Sylphs, stealing the colors from the atmosphere and making the women progressively more beautiful. Remember, gradually, makeup is the art of making the ordinary extraordinary, the ordinary sublime, right? It is an art of transformation. It is an art through which an ordinary woman looks much more beautiful, right? So Pope is also using an ordinary incident, and through his poetic imagination is making it extraordinary, right? Nay, oft in dreams invention we bestow, to change a flounce or add a farbellow. Now the flounce and the farbellow are basically parts of the petticoat. It is the hem, or it is the cloth which is designed for the hem of the petticoat. Now the petticoat, interestingly, is something which we shall talk about a little bit also in a little while, not right now, but the petticoat, as you would call it in Bengali, would be a shaya, right? The underdress, that is the dress worn beneath the main dress. But the 18th century petticoat was, of course, not just an underdress, it was something else. And we'll come to that in a moment. So he says, they often dreams invention we bestow, to change a flounce or a farbellow, so to change the design of the clothes. This day, black omens threat the brightest fair that ever deserved a watchful sprite's care. Some dire disaster, or by force or sleight, but what or where the fates have wrapped in night. So there is this impending doom. The Delphic oracle has spoken of a doom. They have this premonition of great doom, about to happen, but they are not sure where or how it will happen, because it has been guarded in secret in the night. And then comes some very interesting lines, and I want you to look very carefully at lines that begin with 105. So what are the doom? What is the doom that is being forecast? Whether the nymph shall break Diana's law. Whether the nymph shall break Diana's law, incidentally, is the law of chastity, right? So Diana is the goddess of chastity. Therefore, whether the nymph shall break Diana's law, so whether the nymph will fall prey to the sexual advances of a man, or some frail china jar receive a flaw, right? Or whether a jar of porcelain, china is in this case glass and porcelain, and I must remind you that there are certain very interesting comic objects which Pope uses. Porcelain, for example, was imported from China, and China was this newfound colonial territory from where England was importing porcelain vessels and, of course, tea, which we will discuss in another class. But what you see here is the equation of chastity, Diana's law being broken, with some frail china jar being cracked and broken. So a trifling porcelain vessel being cracked and the nymph's honor being stained, right? Or nymph breaking Diana's law. The reference here, of course, as you can understand, is to the female hymen, which is broken during intercourse and therefore signifies the end of virginity. So Pope is equating a moment of sexual indiscretion with the breaking of a vessel, of a glass vessel. Therefore, it shows, what it shows is the moral muddle once again that we saw in Belinda's dressing table, where the Bible and the billet doux, the sacred and the profane, coexisted. Now, Pope is suggesting that for the 18th century aristocratic woman, loss of chastity was equatable to the loss of a glass vessel. So this is a deeply critical line. Now, one of you in our last class talked about the zeugma. Now, the zeugma, of course, as you know, is a figure of speech where one verb is used to unite two nouns, as it were. Therefore, in this particular case, this is not a particularly zeugmatic passage, but what comes next, or stain her honor or her new brocade. Now, brocade is a dress. So staining a dress. You have a stain on your dress and you have a stain on your honor. So stain is the verb, right? That unites the two nouns, an honor or her new brocade. Now, why is a zeugma used? A zeugma is used to unite two contrasting objects. In this case, honor, which is sacred for the woman, and brocade, which is trifling, what you can say, an expensive dress. But for the 18th century woman, staining her honor was equivalent with staining her brocade. Now, for this also, you will have to go to, the play that you are doing, the Way of the World, where you will find that the Restoration aristocratic society was marked with sexual intrigue, affairs by married women, and where sexual promiscuity was seen as something which was common, which was not extraordinary. So in a certain sense, by using the zeugma, Pope is drawing attention to this sexual waywardness and promiscuity within 18th century aristocratic society and thereby criticizing it. He will remember that Pope was, of course, a misogynist who had written that most women have no character at all and that every woman is at heart a rake. Right? So Pope is suggesting that women have very little value for their chastity, very little value for their honor, and they value honor almost on an equivalent with staining a new brocade. Forget her, and then again comes another zeugma. forget her prayers or miss a masquerade. Now, a masquerade was a masked dance in the 18th century. They were held in theaters, almost very big spaces, where aristocratic men and women would purchase a ticket and go masked. Obviously, no one knew who you were, and these masquerades became, places for sexual liaisons, for great fun and frolic, for practice of all kinds of illicit relationships. So forget her prayers or miss a masquerade. So for the maid, forgetting a prayer is as trivial rather, I'm sorry, as missing a masquerade. Once again, I was talking about Pope's world where the profane and the sacred come continuously close together. And in this case, within the heart of the woman, Pope suggests that the sacred and the profane are jumbled, just as in the way on Belinda's dressing table, the Bible lies with the billet doux. And Pope will talk about the moving toy shop of her heart, where there's no real affection for any woman, but only flirtation and narcissistic self-pride. So, or stain her honor or her new brocade, forget her prayers or miss a masquerade, or lose her heart or necklace at a ball. Once again, another zeugma. So for the woman, losing her heart is almost equivalent like losing a necklace. So she moves between men. She moves from one man to the other. As we have seen, Belinda is a great flirt. So Pope suggests that for the woman, losing a heart and losing a necklace at a ball is almost the same. What you can, of course, detect here is a deep misogyny within Pope, a mistrust of female desire, and the suggestion that women are at heart rakes who will move on from men to men. Women are unfaithful. That is what Pope is trying to suggest. Or whether heaven has doomed that shock must fall. So whether the shock, the lapdog will fall, the lapdog will be destroyed. No, haste then, ye spirits, to your charge. Your charge is Belinda. Repair. The fluttering fan be Zephyreta's care. So you see, now Ariel is assigning duties individually to the Sylphs. So he says, the fluttering fan be Zephyreta's care. Now, once again, you see how from the satire, there was an oblique satire of the woman and her unfaithfulness, or her trivial mixing of the sacred and the profane. The Pope immediately now dissolves the poem into beauty. So some of you were asking, how is this poem Horatian? Because Pope is never allowing the satire to be very incisive, very brutal. He's forever combining the satiric and the beauty, dissolving the criticism within the sublime world of imagination. So who are these Sylphs? Zephyretta. You see, that's an onomatopoeia, Zephyretta, where the sound of the air moving is combined through that name. So what does Zephyretta take care of? The fluttering fan. And drops to Brillante, right? Brillante is taking care of the drops we consign, and Momentilla, let the watch be dined. You see, the watch is assigned, the watch, of course, being a very valuable item of the woman's dress. The watch be assigned to who? Momentilla. Note those names: Zephyretta, Brillante, Momentilla. You see how beautifully Pope is playing upon the onomatopoeic to create these images of tiny images of Sylphs, but of ethereal beauty. Do thou, Crispissa, tend her favorite lock. So Crispissa will now use or tend her lock. The lock is this curled lock of hair You see, just as you now take care to straighten your hair, you have straighteners in the beauty parlor. At that point of time, the curled lock would be some object of great beauty. So Crispissa will take that care of that curled lock. And Ariel himself shall be the god of shock. Shock, obviously, is once again the lapdog. So, the Sylphs are given various responsibilities. And this refers once again to the Ennead, where Enos designates various responsibilities to his journey, to his army men, to his generals, right? So this is the reference to the military. The military responsibilities are, as it were, now mock heroically determined to the Sylphs. To 50 chosen Sylphs, of special note, we trust the important charge, the petticoat. Now here I come to the petticoat once again. The petticoat comes up here. As I said, that the petticoat in common parlance refers to the underdress. In Bengali, the shaya. In English, the shift, which is worn beneath the gown, as it were. But 18th century petticoats were very, very valuable dresses, right? They were very often made of silk and extremely gaudy, the silk that came from India. And this was colorful silk. So you would wear a dress and the front of the dress would be open so that the petticoat would be seen underneath. And because these dresses were pretty stiff to wear, the petticoat had a circular whalebone at the bottom, right? A circular whalebone at the bottom to keep the dress in place and stiff, right? So you have to imagine this dress, and I'll show you a picture maybe when I make a final presentation of the poem. I'll show you certain pictures of the Rape of the Lock. But remember this, that a petticoat would be worn of great value, often made of silk and gaudy, very elaborately colored, and its bottom, the bottom at near the feet, would be circular with a whalebone so that the dress would be kept in place. So oft we have been known the sevenfold feints to fail, though stiff with hoops and armed with ribs of the whale. So it's referring to that, whalebone, which sort of creates that circumference of the petticoat. Now, why is the petticoat symbolical? Because it's that sevenfold fence, it's that magic fence which guards the most private part of the woman, the vagina, as it were. Now, it is therefore a kind of a fence that guards female chastity. Therefore, the petticoat is, as it were, a magical dress which allows the woman, or which prevents, the woman from being penetrated by a man. So it's that kind of a defense. Now, if you remember your Mahabharata, you will remember the Chakrabuh, the concept of this sevenfold kind of a fence of defenses. So the woman's Chakrabuh, the woman's great defense, is the petticoat, which prevents her from being sexually assaulted, right? So once again, you see what Pope is doing is, and this you need to understand very carefully, within all this beauty and the sublimity and the satire also lies a fascination with the female body, right? Element of subtle sexuality and sexual tension between the man and the woman, the fascination with the woman's body, as you've seen in Pope's voyeuristic gaze in the episode of the dressing table, and now you see this in Pope's handling of the petticoat which guards the female organ, as it were, and therefore Pope is fascinated, as it were, through the body, with the female body, and therefore you have to give a very careful look at the latent sexual tensions and fascinations with the woman's body in this poem. Right? So, form a strong line about the silver bound and guard the wide circumference around, the wide circumference being that whalebone. Whatever spirit careless of his charge, his post neglects or leaves the fair at large. So now Ariel will talk about punishments if the sylph, as it were, deserts his post or forgets to take care. Now, once again, it refers to the epic, the Aeneid specifically, where there were punishments handed out to deserters and betrayers. What were these punishments like? In the classical age, punishments could be brutal. People would be quartered, cut into 4 pieces, thrown to the lions, for example, or for that matter, tied to a wheel. You know, in the Elizabethan age, they were tied to the stake, and of course, and burnt. And of course, there were other punishments in the Paradise Lost, in Milton's Paradise Lost, where the eternal punishment was to be cast into the hell fire, right? So whatever spirit, careless of his charge, his post neglects or leaves the fair at large. Now, quite obviously, you will find that, what happens here is that the epic punishments, the epic brutal punishments, gigantic punishments, are here transferred into or transformed into ridiculous, very minute punishments. What are these punishments? Shall feel sharp vengeance soon overtake his sins. Be stopped in vials, so they will be imprisonment, but in what? In small bottles, vials, right? Vials of perfume, for example, small bottles of perfume, or be transfixed with pins. Instead of being crucified, they would be transfixed, they would be pinned with pins, or plunged in lakes of bitter washes lie. Washes would be, the chemicals which were used to sort of clear your face wash, as it were. So the sylph would be sort of plunged into oceans of face wash, or wedged whole ages in a bodkin's eye, in the eye of the needle, as it were, he would be imprisoned. Gums and pomatums shall his flight restrain. So various gums would be, athad. Gums would be pastes, and the sylph would be put in these pastes, and he would not be able to escape. While clogged, he beats his silken wings in vain, or alum styptics with contracting power. Now, if you have your parents at home, they very often, for shaving, your father, of course, not your mother, but your father would use alum, fitkiri, it is called in Bangla. Alum would be something which, is very often used to treat wounds, right? So it closes a wound. It has chemical powers to contract, right? Shukieja. Therefore, alum styptics with contracting power shrink his thin essence like a riveled flower. So these are the punishments. Either the sylph is punished by imprisoning in a small bottle, or by putting him in face wash, or by applying alum over his wings so that it is shrunken, or transfixing him with pins. So the epic brutal punishments of the classical epics is here transferred into miniature punishments for the miniature sylphs. Or as Ixion, and this is an epic allusion. Ixion refers to the king who had the temerity to propose love to the wife of Zeus. He had proposed to the wife of Zeus, and therefore Zeus, in a moment of punishment, had fixed him eternally to be, to rotate in a wheel, right? So the epic punishment is here transformed into the Sylphs' punishment to be transfixed onto the whirling mill. In fumes of chocolate shall glow and tremble at the sea that froths below. So the sylph will forever be, hung over the chocolate which the woman drinks. He spoke, the spirits from the sails descend, and now comes this very beautiful moment when the sylphs come down from the sails and create a magical formation around the women. Some orb in orb around the nymph extend. This is a reference once again to Milton's Paradise Lost, where the angels form orbs between them. Orbs is circles, right? So the spirits from the sails descend, some orb in orb around the nymph extend, some thread the razy ringlets of her hair. So some, arrange the ringlets of her binuni of the hair. Some hang upon the pendants of her ear. So the ornaments, the earrings that she wears. While beating hearts, the dire event they wait. So with great doom, with great fright, fear, they await, anxious and trembling for the birth of fate. Now they impend, so they are looking at this crisis in civilization. Once again, you see this epic, doom that will only be the cutting of the lock of hair. So it's another great mock heroic passage where there is the foretelling of great doom waiting to happen, and the great doom turns out to be the cutting of the lock of hair. So the heroic epic versus the mock epic. Now that is Canto 2. Now what is the role of the sylph? That is what I will discuss for the rest of the class. Now, you see, the sylphs have three functions, very clear, three clear functions. The first function is that they provide the mock heroic machinery. In the epic, you have the gods and the goddesses fighting with the men and women. So there is a supernatural machinery in the epic. In this particular case, Pope creates a machinery of great diminution, and he creates the tiny, minuscule world of the sylphs. So the sylphs provide the mock epic counterpart to the epic supernatural machinery. This is point number one. They aid the mock heroic. Second, because they are women, and women, coquettish women who have sort of changed their shape after their death, they provide the feminization, or they add to the feminization of the epic. They are the ones who take care, as it were, of the woman's world. So miniaturization of the epic, mock heroic, feminization of the epic to suit the female-centric rape of the lock. But there's another very interesting thing that they do. Who are these sylphs? These sylphs are like Belinda, women who have flirted and who are refusing to submit themselves in marriage. So they are the coquettes from eternity. So these are the women from all ages who have refused men, yet who have circulated physical, sexual desire and flirted. So what Pope is doing is Pope is talking about female pride from ancient times onwards. So what he's doing is the satire is being deflected from the particular woman Belinda to a type of woman of the sylph who will flirt, who is a coquette, but who will not marry. So Pope is, as it were, satirizing the pride of the beautiful woman, satirizing the urge of the woman to circulate desire, to flirt, yet never submit herself or surrender herself in marriage. So if there is a battle here, the battle is between of power, for power between the men and the women. And how can the women retain their power? By refusing to surrender in marriage to the man. Because when you marry, you accept the husband as the Lord, right? So Pope is not just restricting his satire to Belinda. He's widening the satire, deflecting the satire, diffusing the satire to all flirtatious, coquettish women who have refused to accept men in marriage. Therefore, in doing so, not only is he feminizing the epic, but he's also diluting the satire against Belinda. Belinda is a woman of sublime beauty. There's considerable satire against her vanity, against the fact that she's refusing to accept the man whom she's flirting with. But in doing so, in bringing the sylphs in, Pope is widening the satire to women rather than Belinda. You have to understand this very carefully, right? So there's a function of the mock heroic, there's a function of the satire, and in deflecting the satire from Belinda to the wider category of the woman. And thirdly, there's a third function of sylphs, is through the sylphs, Pope can create a world of great beauty and sublimity, that even within this tiny filigree world, he breathes in, color, he breathes in laughter, he breathes in miniature names, fantastic punishments, and of course, he breathes in the entire element of the radiation and the refraction of colors, whereby the sylphs, through their imaginative beauty, allows Pope's imagination and aesthetics to run riot. So the sylphs have three functions within the poem. They add to the mock heroic, thereby miniaturizing the epic, replace the epic machinery with the mock heroic machinery. Two, they aid the satire. They talk about the age-old pride and vanity and flirtatious instincts of the woman and her refusal to surrender to marriage. In doing so, they not only feminize the epic, but they also deflect the satire from Belinda to the greater category of the woman. And thirdly, through the imaginative, beautiful lines, the sublime presence of colors, the brilliant use of names, the laughter and the humor, they add a great amount of aesthetics to the poem. So they miniaturize the epic, they feminize the epic, and add to the satire against women, and deflect the satire against Belinda, and finally they add and aestheticize the epic to a great extent. It is here that the role of the sylphs becomes so very interesting. And it is with that and with those comments that we shall close today's lecture. Remember that, we have encountered the poem's introduction to Belinda and the aristocratic world. We have seen the miniature world of the sylphs. We've seen the toilet scene. We've seen her journey to Hampton Court, which mimics the epic journey before the battle across the oceans. We have seen how the sylphs are now ready for something dire which is going to happen. And it is now time for the climax of the poem, Canto 3, where the battle of the sexes, the great Trojan War, as it were, will happen over a game of cards. And finally, in consonance with the rape of Helen, there will be the rape of the lock. So Canto 3 remains the first climax of the poem, where you will have the scene of battle as well as the scene of the rape of the lock. It is with this anticipation that we would like to come to Canto 3, and therefore, with that anticipation, I would like to stop the recording and carry on in the next class.